Admiral Kethvar had ruled the Zephyrian Empire's military forces for over 3 decades. His forearms bore the scars of countless battles across 17 star systems, and his crimson eyes had witnessed the fall of entire civilizations. Nothing in the galaxy had ever made him afraid. Until today. The massive warcruiser Decimator hummed with activity as reports flooded in from the Outer Rim territories. Kethvar's subordinates moved with practiced efficiency around the command deck, their scaled hides gleaming under the artificial lights. The Admiral stood before the main viewing screen, watching the data streams that detailed their latest conquest. "Sir, the human colony on Kepler 442b has been secured," reported Commander Zal, his voice carrying the satisfaction of another successful raid. Resistance was minimal. "These humans are surprisingly weak for a species that has spread across so many worlds." Kethvar nodded absently. Humans were a recent addition to the galactic community, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 200 years ago. Most established empires viewed them as children playing with dangerous toys. Their ships were crude, their weapons primitive, and their diplomatic efforts laughably naive. Easy prey for an empire that needed fresh slaves and resources. Casualties? Kethvar asked, though he already knew the answer would be insignificant. Minimal on our side. Perhaps 50 humans eliminated during the initial assault. The rest have been processed for slave markets as ordered. Zal's mandibles clicked in what passed for a smile among his species. The Admiral was about to dismiss the report when another officer approached. Lieutenant Vexran looked nervous, his usually steady hands trembling slightly as he held a datapad. "Admiral, there's something else." Something the ground teams discovered during the processing. Kethvar turned his attention to the younger officer. Vexran had served under him for 5 years and had never shown such obvious distress. "Speak plainly, Lieutenant." "Sir, among the captured humans, we found children. Young ones. The ground teams have separated them from the adults as per standard protocol, but..." Vexran paused, swallowing hard. "Admiral, I've reviewed the intelligence reports on human society. These creatures form extremely strong bonds with their offspring. Stronger than any species we've encountered. And..." Kethvar's voice carried a warning tone. He had no patience for weak stomachs. "Sir, taking their children might provoke a response. The intelligence suggests humans become unpredictable when their young are threatened." Commander Zal laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the command center. "Unpredictable? They're a primitive species with barely functional weapons. What could they possibly do to the might of the Zephyrian fleet?" Kethvar was inclined to agree, but something in Vexran's expression gave him pause. The lieutenant had always been thorough in his research, almost obsessively so. It was why Kethvar kept him on his command staff despite his youth. "Show me these intelligence reports," the Admiral commanded. The main screen flickered as Vexran uploaded his data. Images of human settlements appeared, along with detailed behavioral analyses compiled by Zephyrian spies over the past decade. Kethvar read through the information with growing unease. Humans, it seemed, were unlike any other species the Empire had encountered. Where other civilizations might negotiate for the return of captured individuals, humans had a documented history of going to extraordinary lengths to recover their children. The reports detailed instances of humans crossing impossible distances, facing overwhelming odds, and sacrificing everything for the sake of their offspring. This could be propaganda, Zal suggested, though his voice lacked conviction. Surely no species would risk everything for a few individuals. Vexran activated another section of the display. "Sir, there are historical records from their own planet. Wars fought over single children. Entire societies mobilizing to rescue one infant. They have something they call parental instinct that seems to override all rational thought." Kethvar studied the data more carefully. Images of human conflicts filled the screen, showing the devastation their species was capable of when motivated. He had dismissed humans as weak because their first contact had been peaceful, almost submissive. They had seemed eager to trade and cooperate, accepting the galaxy's power structure without challenge. But these records painted a different picture. Humans at war were creatures transformed. The same species that would share their resources freely would commit acts of shocking violence when their families were threatened. The admiral saw footage of human soldiers fighting with a ferocity that made his own warriors look restrained. "How many children did we take?" Cathvar asked quietly. Vexran checked his datapad. Preliminary counts suggest 47 individuals under their age of maturity. They were among approximately 300 total captives. The number seemed small, insignificant in the context of galactic politics. But, as Cathvar continued reading the intelligence reports, he began to understand why Vexran looked so worried. Every piece of data suggested that humans formed connections not just to their own offspring, but to all children of their species. An attack on human children wasn't just an attack on individual families, it was an attack on their entire civilization. "Admiral," another officer called from the communications station. "We're receiving multiple transmission attempts from human space. They appear to be trying to establish contact." "Ignore them," Zal ordered. "Standard protocol during processing operations." But Cathvar held up one of his four hands, signaling for silence. His tactical mind was working through possibilities, calculating risks and potential outcomes. The intelligence reports had mentioned something else about humans, their capacity for rapid technological advancement when under pressure. The same species that had taken centuries to develop spaceflight had created devastating weapons in mere years when their survival was threatened. "Sir, there's more," Vexran continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "The children we captured weren't just random civilians. Several appear to be offspring of prominent human leaders and military officials. If the intelligence is accurate about their bonding behaviors." Cathvar felt a chill run through his massive frame. In Zephyrian culture, the offspring of leaders were expected to prove themselves in battle. Death or capture was seen as personal weakness. But humans apparently operated under completely different social structures. Their leaders' children were protected, cherished, seen as the future of their civilization. The admiral pulled up tactical displays of human space. Their territory wasn't impressive by galactic standards, perhaps 20 inhabited systems with a total population under 50 billion. Their fleet consisted of less than 1,000 ships, most of them outdated by the standards of established powers. On paper, they posed no threat to the Zephyrian Empire's 12,000 star systems and trillion-strong population. But Cathvar hadn't survived 3 decades of military command by relying solely on numbers. He had learned to read between the lines, to spot dangers that others missed. And everything about the human psychological profile suggested they were about to become very dangerous indeed. "Admiral," the communications officer called again. "The human transmissions are increasing in frequency. They're broadcasting on all channels now." "What are they saying?" Cathvar asked. "Standard diplomatic overtures, sir. Requests for negotiation, offers of ransom payment. Nothing threatening. Yet." The word hung unspoken in the air. Cathvar knew from experience that the most dangerous enemies often began with polite requests. It was when those requests were ignored that civilizations revealed their true nature. "How long until we reach the jump point for Zephyrian space?" he asked. 18 hours at current speed," replied the navigation officer. 18 hours. Cathvar found himself hoping it would be enough time to get clear of human space before the situation escalated. Because despite his 3 decades of experience, despite commanding the most powerful military force in this sector of the galaxy, Admiral Cathvar was beginning to suspect that the Zephyrian Empire had just made a terrible mistake. The intelligence reports had contained one final detail that stuck in his mind. Humans had a saying about their children: "Touch one of ours, and we will burn your world to ash." Most species used such phrases as empty threats, aggressive posturing to discourage enemies. But, as Cathvar looked at the tactical displays showing human space around them, he was starting to think that for humans, it might not be a threat at all. It might be a promise. The command deck continued its routine operations around him, but Admiral Cathvar felt the first stirrings of genuine fear in over 30 years. He had built his career on understanding enemy psychology, on predicting how different species would react to pressure and loss. And everything he was learning about humans suggested that the Zephyrian Empire was about to discover just how far a species would go to protect their children. The viewing screen showed the star field ahead, peaceful and unchanged. But Kethvar suspected that peace was about to end. Because somewhere in human space, parents had just learned that their children were gone. And if the intelligence reports were accurate, that meant the war was already beginning. The first sign that Admiral Kethvar's fears were justified came 6 hours after they had left human space. The decimator's sensor array detected multiple ship signatures appearing at the edge of their detection range. At first, the contacts appeared to be standard human vessels, crude but functional designs that the Zephyrian fleet could easily outfight. Then, the numbers started climbing. "Admiral, we're detecting additional vessels," reported the sensor technician, her voice tight with concentration. "Current count is 37 human ships and increasing." Kethvar moved to the sensor station, his forearms working the controls with practiced efficiency. The display showed a tactical overview of their position, with red dots representing human ships appearing in an expanding sphere around their location. What troubled him wasn't the number of ships, but their positioning. The humans weren't charging forward in a disorganized assault. They were surrounding him. How did they locate us so quickly? Commander Zal demanded. "We're using standard stealth protocols." Lieutenant Vexran was already pulling up intelligence files. "Sir, human ships may be primitive, but their sensor technology is surprisingly advanced. They've apparently focused their research on detection and tracking rather than weapons or armor." "It doesn't matter," Zal dismissed. 40 ships against our battle group of 12? We've faced worse odds. But Kethvar wasn't reassured. Something about the human formation bothered him. In 3 decades of space combat, he had never seen an enemy fleet position itself in such a way. Most species either massed their forces for a direct assault or spread them out to avoid concentrated fire. The humans were doing neither. They were forming a sphere, maintaining equal distance from his position while more ships continued to arrive. "Sensor count now at 73 human vessels," the technician reported. "Admiral, they're not showing any aggressive movement. They're just watching us." Kethvar studied the tactical display more carefully. The human ships were maintaining a perfect distance, close enough to track his movements but far enough away to avoid immediate engagement. It was a hunting formation, something predators used when they wanted to exhaust their prey. "Admiral," the communications officer interrupted. "We're receiving a transmission from the human fleet. Audio only." "Put it through," Kethvar ordered. The voice that emerged from the speakers was human, speaking in accented but clear galactic standard. It was calm, professional, and somehow more frightening than any battle roar Kethvar had ever heard. "Zephyrian vessel, this is Admiral Sarachen of the United Earth Defense Fleet. You have in your possession 47 children taken from the colony of New Hope. We are prepared to discuss the terms of their immediate return." Commander Zal activated his own communication link. "Human Admiral, you are addressing Admiral Kethvar of the Zephyrian Empire. Your vessels are vastly outnumbered and outgunned. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences." There was a pause before the human voice responded. "Admiral Kethvar, I am speaking to you as one military leader to another. You have taken our children. Return them unharmed, and we can avoid what comes next." "Threats?" Zal laughed. "You're surrounded by our superior firepower and you make threats?" Another pause. Then, the human admiral's voice returned, and Kethvar noticed something that made his combat instincts scream warnings. The voice was exactly the same, no anger, no fear, no frustration. Complete emotional control in a situation where any reasonable being should be experiencing intense stress. "Admiral Kethvar, I am not making threats. I am explaining consequences. You have 1 hour to signal your willingness to negotiate. Use that time to review whatever intelligence you have about human history. Pay particular attention to what happens when our children are threatened." The transmission ended. Kethvar stood in the sudden silence of the command deck, his tactical mind racing through possibilities. The human admiral's tone bothered him more than any aggressive posturing would have. It was the voice of someone who had already decided on a course of action and was merely offering a final chance to avoid it. "Vex Ran," he commanded. Pull up everything we have about human military history. Focus on conflicts involving their children. As Lieutenant Vexran worked at his station, the sensor technician provided another update. Admiral, human vessel count now at 112. They're maintaining formation. 112 ships. Even with their primitive technology, those numbers were starting to represent a genuine threat. But what worried Kethvar more was the coordination. A human fleet that size should have communication delays, coordination problems, ships arriving at different times and disrupting the formation. Instead, they moved like a single organism. Admiral, Vexran called out. I've found something. Human historical records indicate multiple instances of extreme response to threats against children. But, sir, there's a pattern. When human children are threatened, their military doctrine changes completely. Explain. Vexran transferred his data to the main screen. In conventional warfare, humans fight with standard tactical principles. They avoid unnecessary casualties, attempt to preserve infrastructure, follow rules of engagement. But, when children are involved, all of those limitations disappear. Images appeared on the screen showing human conflicts throughout their history. Kethvar studied the progression, seeing how human military tactics evolved when their young were threatened. The difference was stark. Peaceful negotiations became demands for unconditional surrender. Limited conflicts became wars of total annihilation. Defensive actions became relentless pursuit across impossible distances. There's more, Admiral, Vexran continued. When human children are threatened, they don't just commit their regular military forces. Their entire civilian population becomes involved. Every human becomes a potential combatant. The tactical implications hit Kethvar like a physical blow. If every human civilian could be mobilized for war, then, the fleet surrounding them might represent only a tiny fraction of the response he was facing. The human civilization included 50 billion individuals across 20 star systems. If even 1% of them could be turned into effective fighters. Admiral, we're receiving another transmission, the communications officer announced. This time, the voice was different. Younger, female, with an emotional intensity that the previous admiral had carefully controlled. Zephyrian Fleet, this is Captain Maria Santos of the rescue vessel Defiant. You have my daughter. Her name is Elena Santos Kim. She is 7 years old. She has dark hair and brown eyes and she's afraid of the dark. The transmission paused, and Kethvar could hear the controlled breathing of someone fighting to maintain composure. I am speaking to you as a mother. Return our children, and we can end this without bloodshed. Continue to hold them, and we will hunt you across every system in the galaxy. We will find every Zephyrian world, every Zephyrian ship, every Zephyrian hiding place. And we will not stop until our children are home. The transmission ended, but, within moments, another began. This is Commander Robert Kim. You have my daughter Elena. You also have the son of my sister, the daughter of my best friend, and the children of my neighbors. We are not diplomats. We are not politicians. We are parents, and you have our children. Then, another voice, and another. Kethvar realized he was listening to the parents of every child taken from the human colony. Each voice was different, but each carried the same message: return the children or face the consequences. Admiral, the sensor technician reported. Human fleet strength now at 200 vessels. Long-range scans are detecting additional formations moving toward our position. 200 ships. Kethvar had won battles against larger forces before, but never against an enemy that showed such coordination and purpose. And if the intelligence was accurate about human psychology, those ships would fight with an intensity no rational military force could match. Sir, Vexran said quietly. There's something else in the historical records. When humans fight to protect their children, they don't surrender. Ever. Military units will fight to complete annihilation rather than retreat. Ships will ram enemy vessels rather than withdraw. They become obsessed with victory at any cost. Kethvar felt his strategic situation becoming clearer, and he didn't like what he saw. He was facing an enemy that wouldn't negotiate, wouldn't retreat, and wouldn't stop fighting until they achieved their objective or died trying. His superior technology and training might win individual battles, but against an enemy willing to accept any loss. "Admiral," Commander Zal said, his voice lacking its earlier confidence. "Perhaps we should consider opening negotiations. The slave cargo isn't worth a fleet engagement." But Kethvar was already thinking beyond the immediate situation. If he released the human children, word would spread throughout the galaxy. Other species would learn that the mighty Zephyrian Empire had backed down from primitive humans. The Empire's reputation for invincibility would be shattered. But if he fought, he was facing an enemy that showed every sign of being willing to pay any price for victory. An enemy that had somehow assembled 200 warships in 6 hours and was continuing to reinforce. "Admiral," the communications officer called out. "We're receiving a transmission from Admiral Chen again. Put it through." The human admiral's voice was still calm, still professional. But underneath the control, Kethvar could now hear something that made his ancient predator instincts recognize a fellow apex predator. "Admiral Kethvar, your hour is almost expired. I want you to understand something. What you see around you is not our fleet. It is not our military. It is the parents of the children you stole. Every ship out there is crewed by mothers and fathers who will not stop, will not rest, will not hesitate to die if that's what it takes to bring their children home." The transmission paused, and, when it resumed, Admiral Chen's voice carried absolute certainty. "You can destroy every ship around you, Admiral. You probably have the firepower to do it. But there are 50 billion more humans where these came from. And every single one of them now knows that you have our children. Return them now, and this ends. Continue to hold them, and you will discover why no species in human history has ever successfully stolen our young and survived." The transmission ended, leaving the command deck in absolute silence. Kethvar stared at the tactical display, watching as the count of human ships continued to climb toward 300. For the first time in his military career, Admiral Kethvar was facing an enemy he wasn't sure he could defeat. Not because they were stronger or better armed, but because they were something far more dangerous than any military force he had ever encountered. They were parents fighting for their children. And, as he looked at the growing fleet surrounding him, Kethvar began to suspect that the Zephyrian Empire was about to learn a lesson that would echo across the galaxy for generations to come. Admiral Kethvar stood before the massive viewing screen in his private quarters, watching the human fleet continue to grow around his position. The count had reached 400 vessels, and long-range sensors were detecting massive formations moving from every human system. What should have been a simple slave raid had become the largest military mobilization he had ever witnessed. The door chimed, and Lieutenant Vexran entered at his command. The young officer looked exhausted, his scales dulled from hours of continuous research. "Report," Kethvar ordered. "Admiral, I've completed my analysis of human military capability," Vexran began. "Sir, we've made a critical error in our intelligence assessment." Kethvar turned from the viewing screen to face his subordinate. "Explain." "We based our evaluations on human performance during their first contact protocols and diplomatic missions. We saw a peaceful, cooperative species and assumed they were weak. But, sir, that wasn't weakness. That was choice." Vexran activated his data pad, projecting holographic displays into the air between them. The images showed human military installations, industrial complexes, and vast shipyards that the Zephyrian intelligence services had dismissed as civilian infrastructure. "Admiral, humans have been preparing for large-scale warfare since they achieved spaceflight. Every civilian shipyard can be converted to military production within days. Every transport vessel can be armed and equipped for combat operations. Every adult civilian has received basic military training." Kethvar studied the projections with growing unease. The implications were staggering. If humans could convert their entire civilian infrastructure to military purposes, how many ships can they field, he asked. Conservative estimates suggest they can deploy over 10,000 combat vessels within a standard week. But, Admiral, that's not the most concerning development. Continue. Vexran manipulated the holographic display, showing human space from a tactical perspective. Sir, the humans aren't just mobilizing their fleet. They're mobilizing their entire civilization. Long-range intelligence indicates that civilian evacuation of non-essential personnel is underway across all human systems. They're preparing for total war. The words hit Kethvar like a physical blow. Total war. He had seen species fight desperately when their homeworlds were threatened, but this was different. The humans were preparing to sacrifice everything, commit every resource, risk every life for the return of 47 children. Admiral, Vexran continued, his voice barely above a whisper. I've found records of what they call the Children's Crusade from their early history. When an enemy force took human children, the response lasted for decades. They didn't stop fighting until they had recovered every child and eliminated the threat permanently. Kethvar moved back to the viewing screen, watching the human ships maintain their perfect formation. 400 vessels, and more arriving every hour. Each ship represented families who had abandoned their normal lives to pursue him across the galaxy. What do our military analysts project for a fleet engagement? He asked. Admiral, our 12 ships have superior firepower and defensive systems. In a conventional battle, we could destroy perhaps half of their current force before taking significant damage. But, sir, the humans aren't fighting conventionally. The tactical display updated, showing the human fleet's positioning in 3 dimensions. Kethvar had been focusing on the 2-dimensional view, but seeing the full formation made his combat instincts scream warnings. The humans weren't just surrounding him, they were forming a perfect sphere with overlapping fields of fire and multiple layers of redundancy. They're not trying to defeat us quickly, Kethvar realized. They're trying to prevent our escape while they bring more forces to bear. Exactly, Admiral. Our tactical computers estimate that within 72 hours, they'll have over 1,000 ships in position. At that point, our technological advantages become irrelevant. Kethvar was quiet for long moments, his strategic mind working through possibilities. Every calculation led to the same conclusion: he was facing an enemy that would accept unlimited losses to achieve their objective. An enemy that had turned the recovery of 47 children into a civilization-wide military campaign. Sir, Vexran said carefully, there's one more thing. I've intercepted human communications traffic. They're not just mobilizing their military. They're calling in every favor, every alliance, every diplomatic relationship they've built over the past 2 centuries. Meaning? Admiral, 17 different species have offered material support to the human rescue operation. The Centauri Alliance has provided refueling stations. The Rigel Confederacy is sharing intelligence. Even the usually neutral Vegan Republic has offered medical support. The implications were staggering. In 2 centuries of galactic politics, humans had apparently built relationships that the Zephyrian Empire's aggressive expansion had never achieved. Species that wouldn't normally involve themselves in military conflicts were actively supporting the human response. A communication alert chimed through the ship's systems. Admiral, urgent message from Imperial Command, announced the communications officer. Kethvar made his way back to the command deck, where Commander Zol was waiting with obvious anxiety. The main screen displayed the imposing figure of Supreme Admiral Thekmor, the highest military authority in the Zephyrian Empire. Admiral Kethvar, report your status immediately, the Supreme Admiral commanded. Sir, we have successfully acquired slave cargo from the human colony as ordered. However, we are currently surrounded by a substantial human fleet attempting to negotiate for the return of captured juveniles. How substantial? Thekmor's 4 eyes narrowed dangerously. Current count exceeds 400 vessels, with additional formations en route. There was a long pause as the Supreme Admiral processed this information. 400 ships? From a species we classified as militarily insignificant? Sir, our intelligence assessments appear to have been incomplete. The humans are demonstrating capabilities far beyond our projections. Another pause. Kethvar could see Thekmor consulting with advisors off-screen. When he returned his attention to the communication, his expression had changed. Admiral Kethvar, I have just received diplomatic communications from 18 different galactic governments expressing concern about our operations in human space. The Galactic Council is calling an emergency session to discuss what they're calling the human crisis. The word sent a chill through Kethvar's massive frame. For the Galactic Council to call an emergency session over a simple slave raid meant that the political implications had already spiraled far beyond military considerations. Your orders, sir? Resolve this situation immediately. Use whatever means necessary, but do not allow this incident to escalate further. The Empire cannot afford to appear weak, but neither can we afford a galaxy-wide political crisis over 47 primitive beings. The transmission ended, leaving Kethvar with an impossible choice. Fight an enemy that showed every sign of accepting unlimited casualties, or negotiate and appear weak to the entire galaxy. Admiral, the communications officer called out. Incoming transmission from Admiral Chun. Put it through. The human admiral's voice filled the command deck, still maintaining that unnaturally calm tone that had been bothering Kethvar for hours. Admiral Kethvar, our reinforcements continue to arrive. Current fleet strength stands at 437 vessels, with 700 more en route. I am contacting you one final time to offer negotiations. Commander Zal activated his communication link. Human Admiral, you are vastly outgunned by superior Zephyrian technology. Your numerical advantage is irrelevant. Admiral Chen's response came without hesitation. Commander, you are thinking like a soldier. But, you are not facing soldiers. You are facing parents. We are not here to win a battle or capture territory or achieve strategic objectives. We are here to bring our children home. And, we will accomplish that goal regardless of cost. The transmission paused, and, when Admiral Chen's voice returned, Kethvar finally heard the emotion underneath her professional control. It wasn't anger or fear. It was absolute, unwavering determination. Admiral Kethvar, I want you to understand what you're facing. Every ship around you is crewed by volunteers. Mothers and fathers who left their jobs, their homes, their comfortable lives to pursue you across the galaxy. They are not professional soldiers bound by military discipline. They are parents who will never stop, never give up, never rest until their children are safe. Another pause. You can kill us, Admiral. You probably will kill many of us. But, there are 50 billion more where we came from. And, every human death will only make the rest of us more determined. You have created an enemy that cannot be defeated by conventional means, because we are not fighting for conventional reasons. The transmission continued, and Admiral Chen's voice took on a quality that made Kethvar's predator instincts recognize the presence of something far more dangerous than any military force. We are fighting for love, Admiral. And, love is the one force in the universe that cannot be conquered by superior firepower. The transmission ended, and Kethvar found himself staring at the tactical display showing hundreds of human ships positioned around his fleet. Each ship represented families willing to die for the return of children that weren't even their own. Each vessel was crewed by beings who had transformed from peaceful civilians into implacable enemies in a matter of hours. Admiral, Lieutenant Vexran said quietly, I recommend immediate negotiation for the return of the human juveniles. Commander Zal turned on him angrily. The Empire does not negotiate with primitives. Our reputation, Kethvar interrupted, is about to become irrelevant if we start a war with an enemy that has turned child rescue into a galactic cause. He looked around the command deck at his officers, seeing doubt and uncertainty in faces that had known only victory for decades. They were military professionals, trained to fight other military professionals according to established rules and tactical doctrine. But, the enemy surrounding them operated by completely different rules. They weren't fighting for territory or resources or political advantage. They were fighting for something that Kethvar was beginning to realize was more powerful than any weapon the Zephyrian Empire possessed. Open a communication channel to Admiral Chen, he ordered. Sir? Commander Zal protested. That's an order, Commander. The communication link activated, and Kethvar found himself speaking to an enemy that had achieved something no military force had ever accomplished. They had made him afraid. Admiral Chen, this is Admiral Kethvar. I am prepared to discuss terms for the return of the human juveniles in our custody. The response came immediately, and, for the first time, Kethvar heard relief in the human admiral's voice. Admiral Kethvar, thank you. We can arrange for immediate transfer at coordinates that ensure the safety of all parties. The children will be returned unharmed, and our fleets can withdraw without further incident. It should have been a simple negotiation. But, as Kethvar looked at the tactical display showing hundreds of human ships, he realized that this moment would be remembered throughout the galaxy as the day a primitive species had forced the mighty Zephyrian Empire to back down. The day that love had proven stronger than fear. And, as he gave the orders to prepare the human children for transport, Admiral Kethvar understood that the galaxy would never underestimate humanity again. Because word would spread that humans had turned the kidnapping of their children into a civilization-wide military response that brought 17 different species to their aid. The age of human expansion was about to begin in earnest. And it would be built on a foundation that no empire could conquer, the absolute determination of parents fighting for their children. The Zephyrian Empire had stolen human children, expecting to acquire valuable slaves. Instead, they had awakened a force that would reshape the balance of power throughout the galaxy. They had learned too late that some lines should never be crossed. And, in human space, threatening children was the most forbidden line of all.